So, this week in Woke, I've decided this is for my own kicks and giggles. We're going to keep up the B-movie monster theme for a while now with This Week in Woke. The first couple of these are just for fun, okay? So these are just for fun because the next couple are not all that fun. So let's enjoy this for a moment or two. Some of you may have seen this. This happened just this last week, but a male-to-female transgender MMA fighter won his match against a biological female. On Friday night, the second openly male-to-female transgender individual to compete in MMA in the U.S. won via submission, meaning she tapped out. Elena McLaughlin is the name that this transgender fighter takes. Elena McLaughlin, a biological male and former member of the U.S. Army Special Forces, beat Celine Provost with a move called a rear naked choke in the second round. And it's a beautiful picture of a man choking a woman on the ground just 1 second within passing out, right? I mean, it's absolutely incredible. So that's him at the end of the bout with his arm raised, right, because he wins the bout. That's him while he was in Special Forces in the U.S. Army. He looks, fundamentally, the same. Yeah. And he's the second one of these. So he said later on in this interview, he has all the respect in the world for this woman for actually going through this beating is what she took at the hands of a biological male. So if he's number 2, you know that number 3 is around the corner somewhere, or these guys are just going to keep on fighting in the MMA. So these are a couple of bonus slides for you guys. These come thanks to our favorite international overlords, the World Economic Forum. They've been putting out slides about what the future is going to look like in their utopia. So you've probably seen pictures of or heard of these sort of sleeping pods in these gigantic eastern cities, Tokyo and so on and so forth. This is their vision for the future of how everybody's going to be able to live in tight spaces and very little environmental impact. By the way, this does not include members of Congress or the Senate or the president or them or anybody else with a couple of Bill Gates will not be sleeping next to you inside of one of these pods in the World Economic Forum utopia that's coming next. And then many of you already know that the WEF is going after meat hard. So a few years ago, it was kind of this joke that cows are bad for the environment because of all of the methane that they excrete. Well, that was the joke. Well, they've hung on to that, and they're building their own little universe around meat is so bad for the environment that we're going to start biologically manufacturing soy-based alternative meat products. You can buy one at Burger King. You know, more and more of these kinds of the Impossible Burger, these alternatives are showing up. A lot of it has way back in the background this environmental push to just get rid of meat. So the line goes when you follow this stuff through, in that final, utopia that we're all going to be in, meat will be a luxury. But again, not for you people, but for everybody else who's going to be able to eat meat, but not for the normal folks. You're going to be eating grub worms, apparently. And look, that person looks so happy. I mean, they're rich in protein, healthy fats. Healthy, not the bad fats, the healthy fats. And full of vitamins. I mean, I'm excited. I don't know about you guys. I'm excited. What I want to talk about next, get into a little bit more of a serious note, but it's another field of critical theory that we haven't actually talked about. These things have started to crop up over just this last week, especially with the stories of 2 teachers who, one of them through some undercover video interview and pictures taken inside of his classroom, that's this guy here. And then another elementary school teacher, she looked in her TikTok video maybe 22 or 23. And she was boasting on her TikTok video that she was making her students pledge allegiance to the gay pride flag instead of the American flag. So these things are just kind of been hitting the surface this week. This guy, I mean, look at him. Those kinds of tattoos, you got to be a good guy. You've got to be a good guy if you've got... So this teacher's name is Gabriel Geip. His classroom is filled with, on the right there is one picture from inside of his classroom with the Antifa flag. The other pictures in his classroom you can find if you kind of look him up, look the story up. He's got posters of Mao, of Stalin, of Lenin. He would mark his students' papers as complete with these special stamps that he bought with the faces of these communist dictators. So they'd get these stamps of Mao and Lenin and Stalin on their papers and so forth. Well, he was outed as a radical, and if you go and try to find his personal page inside of their school system, it's gone. So he may have actually been fired by now. He was brought up on charges. A lot of parents complained and so forth. But he's a special kind of teacher. So again, this article is everywhere. This one happens to come from an interview with the New York Post. The teacher in question, Gabriel Geip, was seen in a video captured by Project Veritas explaining how he pushes his political ideologies on his students, adding that his goal is to, quote, turn students into revolutionaries. That's his job. He goes on to say, I have an Antifa flag on my wall, and a student complained about that. He said it made him feel uncomfortable. Well, this Antifa flag is meant to make fascists feel uncomfortable. So we talked about, again, that play on language, right? What they are doing is the dictionary and historical definition of fascism, but they market themselves as against or anti-fascism. So they believe that everything they stand against, things like traditional, what we consider liberal democracy, capitalism, freedom of religion, they just label all of that fascism. So he says, if you believe in any of that, then I hope this flag actually offends you, right? It's meant to make fascists feel uncomfortable. So if you feel uncomfortable, I don't really know what to tell you. Maybe you shouldn't be aligning with the values that this Antifa flag is antithetical to, Geip told an interviewer from the group in an apparent hidden camera footage. I have 180 days to turn these students into revolutionaries. So not a teacher, an activist, but licensed as a teacher in the state of California. He's been doing this for a while now, and this is his view. My job is to turn students into revolutionaries, not to teach students. And by the way, he teaches advanced placement Western Civ. That was the class that he was teaching. So AP Western Civ is what he was teaching, which is where you learn things like history and how bad people like Lenin and Stalin really were, right? I want to take this to begin to talk about how critical theory makes its way into the world of education. And not just as we might imagine inside of the MA program at Occidental College in their graduate school of education or gender studies or something like that. But I mean the wholesale sense of what all school curriculum needs to be. And we're going to learn it's not from K through 12, then college and past. We're going to learn that it's literally prenatal, this curriculum that has been around for a while now, but has this unique sort of backing behind it. So it's called social and emotional learning. SEL is what it goes by. Social emotional learning is what it stands for. If you're in the field of education, you may have run across this before. If you Google it, you will discover just sort of how widespread it is, who's behind it, who's creating studies about it, what the curriculum actually entails, and so forth. So social and emotional learning is a thing, and it's designed to be curriculum put in schools to help build the character of students. It's character trait education. This language is throughout their literature and their websites. and it's intended to track the emotional and psychological progress of students multiple times during a day, over the week, over the year, and then follows that student through their entire educational career. So CASEL, C-A-S-E-L, this appears to be the organization that's been developing SEL for a little over 20 years now. In fact, SEL is so much a part of the educational structure, it's actually in Common Core. So it's connected to Common Core outcomes, Common Core teaching, Common Core testing. Now, not all schools or districts implement SEL, and some who do only implement bits and pieces of it. So if a parent or grandparents gets worried about SEL, questions just need to be asked. Is this in our curriculum? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe pieces of it are, maybe pieces of it aren't. CASEL, I forget what the C stands for. It's some word, it's not committee, but it's Consortium Committee of Academics for Social and Emotional Learning. And they've been developing this curriculum and the standards involved with it for a little over 20 years now. I feel the same way, Micah. So here's their most recent definition of SEL. Now, again, listen, this is how it works. We're going to read this, and again, if you just sort of read this quickly, and you don't have sort of a larger context, or you haven't done a little bit of digging, you're going to go, what on earth is Pastor Phil, being upset about? But we're going to do a little bit of digging. But this is their definition of the curriculum that they are putting out. And let's see if some of our antenna don't kind of go up a little bit as we read just a little bit of this. Social and emotional learning is an integral part of education and human development. SEL is the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. Hey, man, that sounds good, right? Who's doing the teaching? What's the set of values that we're talking about here? But that sounds great. That's paragraph number 1 of their definition. Paragraph number 2 goes like this. SEL advances educational equity and excellence through authentic school, family, community partnerships to establish learning environments and experiences that feature trusting in collaborative relationships, rigorous and meaningful curriculum and instruction. Having done this for 20 years now, they've got their own set of studies and outcomes and bits and pieces to how the curriculum works and so forth. So they've poured a lot of work into this. Rigorous and meaningful curriculum and instruction and ongoing evaluation. SEL can help address various forms of inequity and empower young people and adults to co-create thriving schools and contribute to safe, healthy, and just communities. So one of our problematic words is inside of here, right? This notion of equity, and remember, that's not just a throwaway word. Equity, and you go through more of their stuff and you dig through more of their information and the studies that they produce and the backup that they have, and they mean equity in the way that we have been understanding equity now. This social justice sense of equity and equity of outcomes and that sort of things. We have actually been working on this. When we talk about authentic school, family, community partnerships, this is language that's buried into something else we talked about last week called stakeholder capitalism, or a way of doing things that uses the word stakeholder instead of shareholder. That's a little bit nuanced, but what that does is it changes who the target of education is. So shareholder, the way that would be applied to education, a shareholder is someone who has an actual ownership in the educational process or in a business. So someone who actually owns stock shares in a business is a shareholder. An investor in a business is a shareholder. An owner in a business is a shareholder of that business. Stakeholder extends the sense of why a business exists beyond those who are invested in it to the social justice of the community around it. And it creates a reason for businesses and now for educational organizations and institutions and unions and school districts to go beyond children and parents and create this unifying sort of sense of we're in it for the school, meaning the teachers and the teachers' unions, the parents, and the community. So it's a way for them to extend the purpose of why they do education. So again, it's just very quick. You read it, you go, that sounds great. You dig a little bit further and realize, well, they mean something different by it. Ongoing evaluation is a phrase inside of this. There are a handful of parent groups that have had their eye on SEL for a while, and some parent groups in some states, Maine was one that just kept showing up, where this education has been in the public school system for several years now, and they have discovered, and these parents have begun to complain, that when SEL curriculum is implemented inside of our schools, our children's emotional state is measured several times a day. It's logged inside of the school technology, and it follows that child from year to year to year. Some parents said it's more information than I give my pediatrician to my kid. And it's not being held secret via something like a HIPAA regulation. It is now inside of the public school system, and it's used to help place my child later on if they had a bad semester 2 years ago. So there's a lot of parents very worried about what some of them have called the psychological profiling of their children by SEL curriculum. And then again, SEL can help address various forms of inequity and empower young people and adults to co-create thriving schools and contribute to safe, healthy, and just communities. It turns out that SEL is not just something that's intended to help young kids have stable emotional learning environments so they can get through the day and do well on their tests. It's a moral framework. It's intended to build a certain kind of character inside of kids. So as you read through their literature and you walk through the organizations that collect the data, that actually deal with the outcomes and the kinds of curriculums that fit inside of this universe, and you pay attention to where families fit inside of this, families are never guiding the character development of their children. SEL is guiding the character development of their children and helping parents come alongside their vision of the character development of their children. So this foundation called the Wallace Foundation, he was created by the Harvard Graduate School of Education and another SEL consortium called the EA-SEL Lab, the EASL Lab. I don't remember what EA stands for. But they've got a couple of gigantic studies out there that you can download online. One of them is a 600-page long review of curriculum and outcomes and data and the kinds of things that are inside of SEL and so forth. And so here's some of how the Wallace Foundation describes how SEL works inside of a school. And again, listen to some of this language. Here it grows a little bit more explicit. It's a little bit more sort of, oh, this is what you mean kind of stuff. Aligning, so deep inside of that document, aligning equitable SEL with trauma-sensitive work is also necessary to ensure that all students benefit from comprehensive integrated support. This is an interesting thing when it comes to woke education. And we're going to talk about what that means a little bit later on. It's a thing, like critical theory is a thing, or critical race theory is a thing. It's a thing. It's an academic expertise, what we're going to call woke education. They consider most education to be trauma-informed education. Why? Because they believe that the world has been broken into oppressor and oppressed groups. And certain students, given their background, given their family, the second they walk into school, they are considered trauma-driven students, simply because of whatever background they came from. So this trauma-informed SEL stuff is, again, it's throughout their stuff because they just assume that in our classroom we have oppressors and we have victims. An equity-focused, trauma-informed approach to SEL acknowledges and addresses persistent environmental stressors such as racism, transphobia, homophobia, and classism, which continually impact marginalized youth. Although trauma has no boundaries with regard to race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, geography, gender, or sexual orientation, it goes on to describe what they're going to do with their curriculum and so forth. So it makes the moral decision to throw all of these things into the same bucket and say all of these things inform our students' lives, and so we're going to deal with all of these in the same kind of way. A little bit later on inside of the same document, they're talking about addressing the needs of girls in school. Girls on the Run, one of the programs that they encourage, Girls on the Run specifically aims to combat societal pressures and outdated gender stereotypes that negatively impact the ability of girls. And most people would go, okay, sounds great. Girls, girl-identifying youth and women to thrive. Youth who identify as non-binary, gender fluid, or gender expansive and are interested in Girls on the Run may participate. So again, here's the ideology. Here's the worldview behind social emotional learning. In those couple of paragraphs that make it sound like we're just trying to help kids, be emotionally healthy enough to get through the day. Yeah, it's more than that. It comes loaded with a worldview. You might even read it like this: youth who identify as non-binary, gender fluid, or gender expansive and are interested in MMA fighting may participate. Right? Same thing, just applied in a different context. The first place I ran across SEL was a context that bothered me. And it was an article written by the World Economic Forum. They were jazzed about social emotional learning. Again, sometimes I feel like a tinfoil hat guy, but this is all this is all out there. This is in their stuff. Why on earth would the World Economic Forum be interested in curriculum for third graders in Poughkeepsie, New York? Why would they be interested in that? Well, they put out their own report here, and again, you can download it if you want to read it. It's sitting on my desk right now. They're interested in the integration of technology to encourage SEL and to track SEL. So you read through this stuff, and it's, hey, we believe that these developers can actually create games that kids can play, and it will help them learn collaborative learning and taking turns. And, you get that kind of language inside of school curriculum stuff. And then you also get the language of it's going to be very easy then for the administrators and teachers to be able to track how those students feel through the day. They're going to be able to look back at the end of the year and see what kind of progress those children have been able to make in their SEL environment, right? So they're tracking how kids feel through the day. So why on earth would the World Economic Forum be interested in that pile of data? Probably because they're all for teachers like Teacher Gype. They're just as interested in activists as probably just about anybody else. In one of the programs that is an approved program inside of this document is called the Nurse Parent Program, Nurse-Parent Program. And in this program, an appropriately approved and certified nurse will visit an expectant mother. So while she is still pregnant, she will visit that mother, and she will bring with her all of this SEL curriculum to help the mother with her social and emotional learning through the process of pregnancy and giving birth, and then we'll walk with mom and the child through their second birthday. Now, here's where these questions become so incredibly important for us. The kind of support that we might think, okay, something like this, there's a lot of people who could probably use exactly that kind of support. The question then is, Who's doing the teaching? What are the values? What is the worldview that's being brought into that house? We as a church support a ministry that does something almost identical to this. Life Network, when a young lady chooses to have a child instead of have an abortion, they will actually put her through classes and they will train her. And if dad wants to be involved, they help train the dad and they walk that family through the child's second birthday. And they provide all of this support. And we think that's great, in large part because we think the values that are being given to that young lady and child and that young family are the values that God has given families so that they may thrive, right? So again, on one hand, we think there's a lot of people who could use this support. And you're absolutely right. I don't want the World Economic Forum, or I don't want the Wallace Foundation creating the worldview that then provides that support to these young mothers and these kids. These are the critical questions that we ask when we come up against this stuff. So here's another little fun bit, one of the nooks and crannies inside of this curriculum. One of the most often used curriculum for the emotional learning inside of this curriculum is an organization called Mind Up, M-I-N-D-U-P. It was actually started and is run by Goldie Hawn, the actress. There she is on the front page of their website, the Mind Up. Does anybody know what Goldie Hawn's religion is? She's a Buddhist. So she's been through Scientology. She self-proclaims as a Buddhist now, apparently. So Mind Up curriculum is Buddhist meditation. So as they describe what students do and as teachers describe what they do when they use Mind Up meditation, the students literally sit in a circle with their legs crossed, their hands up, their fingers and thumbs touching, their eyes shut. They focus on breathing, the rhythm of their heart. They empty their minds and they wait for the teacher to ding that little bell. Then they get up and they start doing stretches and then they get back down and the teacher dings the bell. It's just Buddhist meditation. And Buddhist meditation is designed to empty the mind to allow other things in. That's just the design of Buddhist meditation. Christian meditation fills our mind with the things of God in Christ and the presence of the Holy Spirit and His truth. It's completely different. But Mind Up is a big deal inside of the SEL world. So when we talk about stuff like this, we're talking about a worldview. Not just curriculum, not just trying to help kids kind of through the day. We're talking about a certain set of values. And all of this comes from a point of view that is often just called woke pedagogy or pedagogy, depending on who you listen to. Pedagogy is just a word that means a theory of education. And if you Google woke pedagogy, you're going to discover how many people have written about this, how many schools are devoted to this. This is a really big deal. So what is woke education? Woke education primarily is just the application of critical theory to education and to curriculum and to why we educate kids. So that Antifa teacher is a perfect example of exactly what woke education wants to create. A teacher who will walk into a classroom with 13 or 14 or 15-year-olds, and the goal is to create a political activist, not to create someone who can answer an AP exam on Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, right? That's not the goal. The goal is a political activist. So it's the application of critical theory to education. It explicitly, and again, this isn't Pastor Phil who just can't get his brain off of Marxists. This dude needs to move on. Forget the Marxists, they're all dead, Phil. This is, again, what they write and what they say. It fully embraces Marxism, cultural Marxism, neo-Marxism. They are self-described Marxists. People writing since the 1960s till now. It embraces Marxist power ideology. On the one hand, that power ideology, there are winners and losers in this world, the oppressors and the oppressed, victimizers and the victims. We're on the side of the victims. We're going to rise up through some form of cultural or physical or gun shooting revolution, and we're going to level this whole playing field out. So you take that ideology and you shove it into education curriculum. It embraces Marxist power ideology on one hand and the possibility of social transformation through the raising of woke students on the other. If we get enough students on our side, they will see what's really wrong and we're actually going to get something done here. So this is interesting. The goal is not to get students to repeat skills. So that AP Western Civ teacher is not trying to teach them Western Civ, not repeat skills. Or in the words of one particular writer in this field, we don't want students to, quote, mimic special forms of language or knowledge. So teachers, their job is not to get a student to mimic what he calls, this particular article calls, special forms of language. Now, what does he mean by special forms of language? The English language. Now, remember, part of the work inside of this system is to change the definitions of words. This word has meant one thing, justice has meant one thing, we're going to make it mean something else over here. So we don't want you to learn this sort of Webster's dictionary version of the English language. We're going to fill in other language for you. We don't want students to mimic and repeat knowledge. Now, this is where we get into really strange and bizarre fields, and it's the field of 2 + 2 = 5. It's a real and serious group of people because things like mathematics and physics and Western literature and received history, if any of this claims some sort of connection to truth or reality or objective truth, all of it is oppressive because all of those kinds of things are oppressive. So we have to scoot students out from underneath all of that stuff and turn them into activists. They need to see their oppression. They need to see who's oppressing them, and we need to raise them to be revolutionaries. This is all woke pedagogy. This is the job. This is what's buried inside of pieces of SEL and so forth. The language of cultural hegemony is in woke pedagogy a lot. Now, it's been a while since we've talked about this, but our favorite Italian prisoner, Antonio Gramsci, in the 1920s. So he's the Marxist who changed traditional Marxism from economic revolution to cultural revolution. Antonio Gramsci was the one, he is a hardcore Marxist, who decided there's way too much Christianity going on out there. There's way too much prosperity in the Western world. Too many people think that if they work, they can do better than their parents did. And that's cultural oppression. That's hegemony. So he said the only way to actually get to a gun-shooting revolution is to destroy that cultural hegemony first. So Gramsci's idea about cultural Marxism turns into what these activists in the 1960s called the Long March Through the Institutions. Do you remember that phrase? And the concept was this: let's begin educating kids. Let's get a hold of teachers, journalists, artists, authors, politicians, and over the decades, we're going to change enough minds. We're just going to plant enough of these people in positions of cultural power that we're going to change the culture. Thank goodness none of that worked. I'm kidding, right? Sometimes I don't know if you guys are, okay. You got to be with me here. 60 years later, voila. Long march through the institution. Woke pedagogy also holds to what they call or many of them call constructivist epistemology. Okay, another one of these $1.50 phrases. But we've run across a version of this phrase before. Critical race theory holds to what we call standpoint epistemology. Epistemology is just that 50-cent word that means what we know and how we know it. So when you do epistemology, you're talking about objective reality and truth and how we know these things to actually be true. But if you're talking about constructing knowledge or subjective knowledge, you are deliberately disconnecting an individual from objective truth and reality. And the only truth that can be known, the only truth that is valuable, is what I either construct or I just feel. okay? So, very few TikTokers are going to use the constructivist epistemology language, but they're going to talk about the need to be their authentic selves. That's the street version of relativistic epistemology. I need to be allowed to be my authentic self. This is what I feel about me. This is what I know about me. Nobody's allowed to keep that from happening. This is inside of woke education. So knowledge and truth, these are constructs. And the goal is to wake the student up. Wake the student up. You're oppressed. You don't know it yet, but you are oppressed. The goal in woke education is to overcome a student's inherent objections to woke education. So a student will walk into a classroom with built-in objections to critical theory. Now, these built-in objections are things like how mom and dad taught me things are things like, God forbid, what I learned in church about what is morally right and what is morally wrong. These things are all impediments to woke education, to critical theory, to critical race theory. So we're teaching teachers how to break that down and turn students into activists instead of repeating knowledge. So this issue it's a big deal. In some circles, it's been not just a big deal for a long time, it's been implemented for a long time. And again, this is why just curriculum is so important. What's going on inside of curriculum? What are individual teachers doing inside of their classrooms? This kind of stuff is critically important because this kind of stuff is out there and is important to a lot of people. So there's your introduction to woke pedagogy. I was a wonderful gal I spent some time with a few years ago who was doing some kind of neat things around town. She was teaching for some college. I can't remember which it was, but she kept telling me, oh, you've got to read this book. You've got to read this book. It's changed the way I do everything. And she's a university level teacher. But she said it changes the way that I do absolutely everything. And it was a book by a Brazilian called his name is Paulo Freire. I think I'm pronouncing his last name right. But it's called Pedagogy of the Oppressed was the name of the book. And it's one of the standard books in this universe. And it's all about, I don't teach my students. I mean, she's telling me stuff like this. I don't walk into my class to teach my students anymore. What we're doing is we're listening to their stories and we're pulling apart the oppressed stories inside. And so, that's their college education now because this book has changed the way that she teaches. So it's a thing. It's out there. But now you guys are at least a little bit informed, right? A little bit of woke pedagogy.